All right, go ahead, President Johnson.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for December 9th, 2020. For those of you who are watching at home, linked up through YouTube or some other vehicle, if you want to follow along with our agenda, you can go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and you will see board information. If you left click on that, down to the left, you will see a window open up and it will say new agendas. If you left click on that, you'll see a link and you can get into our agenda that way. We do have a couple of items tonight that will be sort of meaty. So if you're tuning in to see more discussion and more questions on the issues that will be brought before the board next week for a vote, this is the meeting that you want to attend, because this is where we get a little down and dirty and nitty gritty and really pick these issues apart. So this is one that you want to tune into. So welcome everyone, and we'll get into our agenda. Item 1 is audience communications, and I understand, Mrs. Jenkins, we do not have any this evening. Is that correct?
That is correct. I just double checked the Google form and we do not have any audience communications.
Thank you very much. That'll take us to item 2, our committee of the whole. I do not have any on the agenda. Mrs. Oquist, do we have anything on for committee of the whole?
We do not, President Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. That'll take us to item 3, our curriculum committee. And I will turn it over to the ever capable hands of Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Johnson. I would feel much more capable if I could have this technology figured out at the moment. I might have to defer to you because I can't get this to work.
Alrighty, that's not a problem. We have one item under curriculum committee, and it's our Hanover Research agreement, and Mrs. O'Brien will be presenting that tonight. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, President Johnson. I bring to you this evening a request to create a partnership with Hanover Research to do some work with us and have an external set of eyes to review our modules that we are writing at the elementary. A little bit over a year ago, I talked to some people at the Wayne County Curriculum Director meetings, and they were utilizing Hanover Research as an external viewpoint for their district. And I brought it back to Superintendent Oquist, and we did some conversation of what maybe we might want to work with them about. And I spoke to them on and off throughout last year, wanting to make sure that if we were going to use a service like this and have a contract with a research company like this, we wanted to make sure it was on the right thing. Mrs. Corey and I met with them a couple times last year, right after Christmas, and we actually had set up to begin some work with them when we closed. We talked to them a couple times during the spring, and they wanted to get started with some work with us in the fall, and we said, hold on, we just need to make sure we get back into the swing of things and see where we're at with our modules. And so we feel like this is a good time to employ their services. So this would be for a 3-year contract, but it does have a clause for us to opt out in about 18 months. So never having done this work, I wanted to make sure that I'm being fiscally responsible with this money, and that if the work is done, I don't want to have to stay in a 3-year contract if it's not needed. They would be providing us with current research and the trends in research, and then they would work with us to gather input from our stakeholders. So again, if we utilize them to evaluate our elementary modules, they would do some surveying of the teachers and the parents and the students about the quality of what we're writing, and then help create that viewpoint of the work that we're doing. So this is $47,000 a year, each year for 3 years. And this purchase this contract can be taken out of the Title IIA funds, so federal funds for professional development And so I am requesting that this be put on next Monday's agenda, and I am open to questions.
Are there any questions?
I'd like to just add one thing, if you don't mind, Mrs. O'Brien. I'll join you on this for a moment. A number of districts utilize Hanover Research for determining really one of two things: either a return on investment. So perhaps a district may incorporate a new program, a new position, and they're trying to determine the impact of that position. And so Mrs. O'Brien and I had initially had some conversation after we both met with our respective groups within Wayne County, and had an opportunity to hear more about the services of Hanover Research. We talked about this in relation to some of the additional support positions that we added as part of the Wayne County Enhancement Village. And that was where we had begun some conversation to take a look at determining some return on investment for some of the ads we made during the Wayne County Enhancement Village. And then we decided to take the route that we're utilizing with regard to identifying some success criteria and looking at that over a multi-year period. But then this other leg that Mrs. O'Brien just defined for us is really that research component, to take a look at your curricular materials to determine the effectiveness of those materials as it relates to the curriculum standards. And she and I have both had the opportunity to hear from really prominent researchers such as, Dr. Nell Duke in the area of literacy, and many others. But one of the things that is often referenced as you talk with researchers, especially in the area of curriculum development, is the importance of having research to back up the materials you're utilizing and to be certain that they are effective in meeting the needs of the students for whom you're using those materials, and also in relation to the standards that you're teaching. And so, as you know, we shared with you, Mrs. O'Brien shared, I believe we were in a meeting at Churchill when she first shared our integrated reading and writing modules that also integrate the content areas of science and social studies. And the leadership of the Academic Services Department and our literacy coaches, as well as many of our teachers, have contributed a significant amount of time and effort and energy to create and further develop these modules. And this really gives us what we believe is a very important outside objective look at those modules, because these are the materials that we are committed to using in all of our elementary classrooms as our consistent foundational tier 1 instructional materials. And so it really is important that we have this opportunity to have Hanover come in and conduct that research for us, give us that feedback, as well as provide us an avenue of research that they have available to them that can certainly support the work of the Academic Services Department and indeed our entire division of instruction. So they have really made a very positive impact in a number of districts with whom they've worked. I've had an opportunity to speak to superintendents who had this company in and either doing RTI studies or studies with regard to curriculum effectiveness, as has Mrs. O'Brien. So we're excited to really to delve into a partnership with them, especially on something as important as our integrated reading and writing modules.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Mrs. Oquist or Mrs. O'Brien? Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. So if they come in to do some of this work, do they come in monthly, bi-monthly, or how is that set up, and where do they do their work? Do they do their work at the administration building, or do they meet with teachers? How do they actually do their research and work?
So in my beginning work with them and setting up this contract, what I was told was we would have 2 researchers assigned to us. And obviously we would begin virtually and lay out our plan and create a model of what we're looking for, and then them tell us what steps they would do, what their company provides. And then we would set up the organization of when they would jump into asking teachers, asking students, getting feedback like that. So it would be mostly with Mrs. Corey and myself to start. And then again, hopefully when we can do things more in person, they would come in and be in our district. But to start, it would be virtual, and our first steps would be creating that plan of what we want them to partner with us about.
Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Mrs. Burton?
Thank you. Mrs. O'Brien, you said this is going to be paid for out of Title II money, which I'm not as familiar with as others. You said this is out of a budget that is specifically for professional development. Is that correct?
Yes, Title II is similar, so it's federal money. So it is a federal grant money that comes to each state and then gets disseminated out. We get funds every year for professional development, professional resources, curriculum resources. And so this is allowable for us to put into our Title II grant.
Okay. And you mentioned surveys. At times we've sent out our own surveys, and then we have complete control over the questions. At times, other entities have asked questions of as on anything that's pertaining to our district, in which case we have no control over the questions. Where do we fall in the continuum with this company and this research they're going to be doing?
So I have not worked with them before. So my expectation is we're developing those surveys together based on the research project that we're going to be laying out. So they obviously, this is what they do. So they have set questions, I'm sure, that get at certain things, but my understanding in meeting with the two representatives that I have over the last several months is that these things would be tailor-made for Livonia Public Schools. And then they would do the legwork for the surveys and disaggregate the data and then share it back with us.
Okay. And then this likely goes without saying, but say we discover that with some of our modules that we are utilizing are not as effective as we were hoping them to be. What is our plan from there?
So our plan is to improve them or change them or get rid of them and do something else. So that is one of our main goals, is to look at what we are doing and its effectiveness on student learning.
Okay. Alrighty. And then this sounds like something that's interesting and exciting to have an outside organization that knows what they're talking about come in and assist us in getting some validation on our modules. Is this something that you can report back to the board on over a period of time and let us know how it's going?
Absolutely. I would love to share with you what we are learning and what we'll be making decisions based on this.
Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? President Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Oquist, you indicated that other districts are using the same service. Is that right?
Yes.
Generally, have they been satisfied with the work that they have done for them?
They have. In fact, one of the things that struck me is one of my colleagues in Wayne County, they are actually on their 8th research study with Hanover Research because they have found such benefit rather than trying to take an internal look to determine the effectiveness of, again, a position or an ad or a curriculum module. They have found that that they have begun to turn to this as a way to really determine if the investment that they're making, whether it's in a human resource or in a physical resource, is making the impact that's intended. And they feel like they're able to then pivot either away from or enhance whatever it is that they're doing to either determine if they need to continue in that direction, or again, if they need to abandon that and move to something else. And oftentimes, you may not find that out for many, many years if you're trying to take a look at something internally. And so again, this has been utilized from districts, again, for curriculum materials all the way through positions and departments to determine if you're structured effectively. There are many different aspects that for this research group and what they study.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien and Mrs. Oquist. I appreciate you telling us about Hanover and what we hope that they'll do for us. President Johnson, that concludes the Curriculum Committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. And I'm assuming this is going to be on for our next regular meeting.
Yes, please.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. That will then take us to item 4, our Finance Committee, and the ever capable hands of Mrs. Bonifield.
Thank you, President Johnson. Today we are going to have Mrs. Smith go over our budget memo.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Bonifield. I'll start off by saying this is actually one of the most straightforward budget amendments that we've had. I'll jog your memory to the updates that we went over back in October, and just share, starting with the general fund on the revenue side, I've incorporated those adjustments that we went over in October, and net we're really looking at just an additional $20,000 adjustment on the revenue side, so really small comparatively. So back in October, I went over with the board that we would have a rather large adjustment to our state revenue in the general fund. And that was as a result of budgeting for a $650 per pupil decrease, as we were advised to. Again, we have to adopt our budget for the 2021 school year back in June. So at that time, revenue estimates were projecting a very large decrease in the state aid fund. And so we were looking at some pretty significant estimated cuts to both the 1920 budget and the 2021 budget. So we adopted a budget assuming a $650 per pupil loss, as well as a decline in enrollment of about 100 students. We came to learn, I believe it was in September, that a couple things. Number one, the actual funding, that we were not going to see a cut. In fact, the state was able to work some magic and we'd actually be seeing a $65 per pupil increase, which is wonderful news. And we also learned of a new way of counting the student membership. And as a school district, we're funded on a per-pupil basis. So they historically do the count based on 90% of our fall count and 10% of our prior spring count. And they moved to a model that would fund us based on 75% funding at our 1920 rate and a 25% count from the 2021 school year. So that helped us because we also learned when the students returned that we were down more students than we had originally budgeted. We are now in the ballpark of about 450 students down in the general fund. So the net of that was about a swing of almost about $10 million in additional revenue over what we had included in the proposed budget. We also had some additional funding to recognize. We received some coronavirus relief funds in the amount of $350 per pupil, which works out to about $5 million for us. So we'll see that reflected in this general fund amendment. We also have the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. I had estimated that we weren't going to receive our final payment in 1920, so I had included the final 1920 Wayne County Enhancement Millage payment in the 2021 budget, but we actually did receive it in June, and we were able to count that in the 1920 budget. So I've adjusted for that. And then also because of where our fund balance was, this amendment, we also discussed the board policy that would require us to put our sale of property proceeds into the capital projects fund. And so I've made that adjustment. So the additional $200,000 adjustment is a decrease. While we did see an increase, now I'm wondering if I should pull up my numbers so you can see something. I'll bring that up in just a moment. So we had some adjustments in our 147C revenue from the state. So that's a state revenue that helps districts offset the cost of retirement costs. And we saw an increase in a particular section, 147C, that is the one that flows in and out of the school district. So for every dollar that we get in that, we have to send that right straight to the Department of Retirement Services. And we also have to record that expense in the general fund. So we saw an increase last year. We received about $12 million from section 147C. And this year that went up to $14.4 million. So a rather large increase in 147C. So that is the additional expenditures that you'll see momentarily in the general fund, is largely that 147C retirement cost adjustment. Another section of 147C, we actually did see a pretty large decrease of $1.5 million. So those two kind of offset each other. So we don't see an increase in the revenue, but will recognize that increase in expenditures of retirement costs. So with that, I apologize. I probably should have pulled the numbers up a few minutes ago, but I will present that now for you. And if somebody will let me know if that, once it comes up, if you can see that all right, or if you'd like me to zoom in.
Zooming in is always in order.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. Perfect. Okay,
there we
so
go.
is this all right, everybody?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. So on this first slide, this is our general fund revenue. We have got 3 columns on the screen. The first column of numbers is our 19-20 actual revenue received. The next column is what we adopted back in June. And then the first amended column, the third column, is what I'm recommending for the board's approval next week. So we can see, I'll go over line by line. On the local revenue line, I'm proposing to lower that estimate. We included in the proposed budget an assumption that all of our programs would be running at their full capacity this year, such as the school-age childcare and the Jackson Center. And as we know, based on the way we started the school year, we weren't running our school-age childcare in the month of September. We did start running it when we opened in October, but that's had an impact on our revenue projections. Also, while we're in this paused in-person instruction and we are learning remotely, we are also not, operating our school-age childcare program. So that will impact the revenue we'll be collecting from those programs. So I've adjusted the revenue down on that. Just like on the expenditure side, how conservative budgeting would have me, I'll say, overestimate the expenditures. On the revenue side, I would want to be conservative, underestimate the revenue that we'd be getting. So again, I went ahead and made an adjustment on the revenue side for that estimated decrease in funding from those programs. On the state side, we see a pretty significant increase. That's what we just discussed about the, again, we budgeted for a $650 per pupil decrease, and we actually saw a $65 per pupil increase, as well as the change in how the students are counted. On the federal side, we see a nice healthy increase from $1 million up to almost $6 million. And again, that's that coronavirus relief funds, about $5 million that we've received federal funds flowing through the state to districts to help us with some of the additional costs that are being incurred by the district to respond to the pandemic. The next number that you'll see on here is our beginning fund balance. I've updated that with the actual beginning fund balance, which was $33.7 million. So with that, I will move us to the expenditure side. And again, on the expenditure side, during our October update, I had shared adjustments of about $6 million on the expenditure side. The largest chunk of that being salaries for newly hired teachers and the associated benefits with that. One of the district's responses to the pandemic was to decrease class size as much as possible. So did mean in hiring additional staffing. So that's been reflected in this budget. We also increased our PPE supply budget, increased it by an additional $1.5 million. Thankfully, again, we've got coronavirus relief funds that help us offset that additional cost. Also some restoration of cuts that were made when we thought we would be seeing the $650 per pupil decrease. And the last adjustment we had gone over in October was the potential general fund support of our food service program. And the reason for that, again, is with us going to remote, obviously we are still maintaining our food service program. We're still employing our staff. Our staff are still working to pack lunches and breakfasts for students in need. But without operating our normal lunch program, we're not seeing the same sales to pupils that we would normally be seeing. And so we've seen our expenditures staying consistent, but we're seeing a pretty significant decrease in the estimated revenue. And so I had shared with the board that to be conservative, we should estimate for about potentially needing to use general funds to help support our food service program. I've been monitoring that very closely, and at this point, I am recommending that we potentially even adjust more or prepare for potentially more support from the general fund of our food service program. So in this amendment, on the screen, you can see towards the bottom under other financing sources. Historically, the general fund has only had a small transfer out of about $20,000, and that's to go to support our GSRP or Great Start Readiness program. This I've included a $400,000 transfer to the food service program. So I want you to know that I will be working with our food service supervisor and director of operations, obviously to try to generate as much revenue as we can, and looking at what we're doing and seeing where we can generate more so that we can try to minimize that transfer as much as possible. But I definitely wanted to prepare the board for that possibility. So that's included in this amendment. Other than that, so the one thing that we did not cover back in October was the increase in the 147C expenditures, those retirement expenditures. Again, that's revenue flowing through the district. So this amendment is also includes a $2.5 million increase in retirement costs. Again, that we do get funding from the state from, and we recognize that in the general fund, but we also have to recognize the expenditures on the general fund side. In addition to that $2.5 million in retirement costs, I've also put in additional $400,000, $200,000, which we just discussed as additional support to the food service fund, and $200,000 under the other central support function. And that's specifically to the IT information technology department. And that was really, it's not for any known cost at this time, but as we all know, the needs on our technology department and for computers and different softwares and programs is unlike previous years. And so that's putting a placeholder in there should the need arise to make any more computer purchases. We've spent the last of the 2013 bond, so we don't have that to draw on. We've also spent the last of that little technology fund that we had. That's gone. We do have the sinking fund to draw on for instructional technology, but that's limited to just instructional technology for students. So if we needed to get things for administrators or teachers, for example, for now, that would be something that we would pay for out of the general fund. So again, that's just a placeholder. That's not necessarily a purchase that we have planned yet, but should we bring something to the board, you would know that we have that money set aside in the budget for that. So I will pause just to see if there's any questions so far in the general fund revenue expenditure side. If not, I'll move on to our other funds.
Question,
I can't see it. Oh, yep, go ahead.
Question, Allison. With regard to the state revenue, you said we're down more students than we had anticipated. I think you said about 450.
Correct.
And you were talking about the student count that they're using now in the 75-25. I'm assuming that's going to go back once we get back to what I'll call normal, back to the 90-10. Is that true?
I have not heard anything related to the 21-22 budget, but at this point, I would estimate that it would go back to the 90-10 normal model unless we heard something different. The way that it was presented, that I interpreted it, was that this was a one-time super blend, count that would be used. But I'll defer if Andrea has any other sense on that.
Yeah, I would concur with Mrs. Smith that at this point in time, I think it would be most prudent if we assume that we will revert back to the 90 fall prior spring 10, rather than assume that the super blend would continue. And so that will be how we will proceed in the spring as we prepare budgets for your consideration prior to adoption in June. But we will also, of course, follow closely any legislation related to that. But it would require continued action on the part of the legislature to determine if they were going to change that.
Okay. So along with that, we were fortunate enough not to recognize the significant decrease, and we're fortunate enough to get a modest increase, assuming we don't have a significant decrease in the funding. At some point, the actual numbers of students that we lost will catch up with us. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes.
I just did a quick calculation too. So if we had to recognize the full 450 pupils this year, that would be a roughly $4 million cut to our general fund. So it really was quite a blessing from the legislators that they changed that model, because what that does for districts, it allows us more time to adjust to our new student counts. And again, that was very hard to receive that news. I think we learned about the budget, the actual amounts, maybe at the end of July or early August. So that would be very quick turnaround to learn of that cut and then have to make those adjustments in staffing so radically. And so now we at least have additional time for planning before the 21-22 school year.
All right. So
And I just want to make a quick mention with regard to when we brought the budget in June, we did anticipate and bring forward to the board that we anticipated a 200 student loss. So that the differential wasn't an additional 450, it was 450 total. So we had budgeted for as that natural decline that we've seen for the past, several years with regard to, the lower birth rate and the larger numbers of students that we graduate versus those students that are coming in. And so the differential was about 250 more than we had originally budgeted in June.
okay, and my point here is simply that while it looks pretty good now, we have to keep that in mind moving forward as to what that impact's going to have on the general fund. The other thing that I had, you mentioned, Allison, these coronavirus revenues that we were getting, and there's a certain expenditures that goes with that. Does that end up being about a dollar for dollar set off, or is there a bit of a recognized profit on that?
That's all restricted funds, so that is dollar for dollar, and we do have to report back to the state how we spent those funds. We got a couple of different grants. The coronavirus relief funds was the largest. That was the $5 million grant that we've included here in the general fund, and those funds actually have to be spent by December, which we have easily done by again hiring the staff that we have to maintain the lower class size, and also with the PPE supplies that we're purchasing. So my hope would be, as we look ahead to next year, hopefully we're living in a different world by then, and the PPE supplies, for example, will be not as significant or maybe gone. But in the event that we still have to do those PPE supplies, I think the state and districts would be, again, hoping there would be funding coming from the federal government to help us offset those costs.
All right, so that ends up being more or less a neutral transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that correctly.
Yep. But I mean, just as we're speaking about that, again, we use that to maintain our smaller class sizes too, with the in response to the pandemic. So if those federal funds don't come through for next year, again, that's something that we're going to have a dialogue too about our staffing levels that we're maintaining now, and if that's something that we can continue. I feel like I should expand upon that just to say we do always have a number of retirements every year. So I'm not hinting at any kind of a layoff or anything like that, but through natural retirements, then we have the dialogue of, are those retirements filled? So just something for us to be conscious of.
Thank you.
One thing, I'll scroll down a little bit. We can't see that, but the good news with the adjustments to the revenue and the expenditures, our ending projected fund balance is still just under $30 million or 17.7%. And again, the Michigan School Business Officials recommended fund balance range is 15 to 20%. So we still are within that recommended range for the 2021 school year. Okay. I'll move on. The next fund we'll look at is our funded projects fund. And again, these are, sure. Yep.
Mrs. Bonfield, can I ask a question?
Please, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody on my screen.
It's okay. Just going back to that other slide, I'm just looking at like athletics and a transportation, that it doesn't look like it went down very much. And I know right now we're not doing athletics and we're not running our buses. We did run them for that period, but could you just expand? Is that what you're anticipating it to look like if we all come back up in January, so it wouldn't have dipped down very much? Or can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I'll start with the transportation. So you can see just a very modest decrease in that fund, recognizing some of the gas, the savings we'll see in that. We have been fortunate to repurpose our transportation drivers, and we are using them. They just started this week to start delivering meals to families that have opted for the lunches and breakfast. So we're delivering those to doors. It's been wonderful when families were needing to come and pick them up at the buildings. That was a struggle for some to get to the building. So using these drivers, we've seen a very large uptick in the number of families opting for those meals. So for the transportation piece, we don't see a significant decrease in the expenditures because we are continuing to use all of our staff. We're also doing some pretty unique things with our paraprofessionals, our bus parapros. I'm doing some much needed professional development. And I say that as a good thing in that, normally we're very limited in the time that we get to spend with them on professional development. And so we're using these pauses to help develop skills further, which we know are going to have a great impact with our students. On the athletic side, I will actually forewarn Mr. Willenberg about athletics. So our fall season, we're talking about athletics and how the budgeted expenditures, we don't see a large decrease in the athletic expenditures. And that's because we still are employing our coaches. The fall season still did run. So fall coaches received their stipends. And I know our plans, Mr. Willenberg could speak more to the winter season, but at this point, we are still planning on all of our athletics running. In the event that a particular season didn't run, though, you could anticipate to see a decrease in the athletic expenditures.
Okay, sorry, Crystal. Is everybody else okay? Okay, Mrs. Smith, thank you.
Perfect. Good questions. On the funded projects, nothing very significant to update. We've just updated based on actual grants that the district has received. Back in June, we are doing a lot of estimating, and now at this point in the year, we have some actual grants to update the board on. One nice, it's a smaller one, but I'm excited to share. Our garage supervisor, Rick Martin, we're so happy. He took the time to apply for a grant from, and I'm sorry that I'm not getting the organization correct, but it's like a Propane Association of Michigan, something along those lines. And so for those 22 propane buses that we just received at the beginning of the school year, we received a $20,000 rebate. So awesome news. That was something we were already getting 40% funding from the state on that. We can see that under the state sources, the VW settlement, $844,000. So that went to help pay for those propane buses. And then in addition to that, we've also gotten another $20,000 rebate. So nice news to share on that front. So nothing, again, not really any major changes on the grant side. That moves us on to the special education side. Again, we don't see much of a change here. I've updated the beginning fund balance. You'll see on the expenditure side, we've adjusted a few of the lines up just a little bit from where we adopted. Again, most likely the actual expenditures for 2021 will be more in line with the 1920 school year. One thing I would like to point out, which was very nice, we've talked about when Wayne Risa presents their budgets to the school districts, they solicit feedback from us. And one of the, comments we had was about their very healthy special education fund balance. And in response to that, Risa is doing a one-time grant, and they gave us 3% of our actual 1920 expenditures to use on instructional improvements, like technology improvements. We've already ordered a number of computers. I think that order came before the board in August, but as you can see on here, we have this line for additional expenditures and 3%. So we received an additional $430,000 from Wayne Risa this year for kind of various program improvements. So we have a few ideas of how to use those funds. One of the things I know Ms. Terriel is working on is a greenhouse for our work skills program over at Garfield. So we could use some of the funds for that. And then again, the majority of it is for some additional instructional technology for our students. Moving on, I've changed the order a little bit on here, but this next page is a few of our capital projects funds. All three of these are ones that are coming to an end. So by the end of the year, I'm expecting them to have a zero fund balance. So this first one is I'm calling it old sinking fund. So this is a sinking fund that just expired. The last levy for it was in 2019. We've already used all of the funds this year. So 2021 will be the last time that we see that fund. The next fund down is our technology fund. And again, we've put on the last purchase for that fund. So I anticipate that will be closing out this school year. And then the last one is our 2013 bond. As the board will probably recall, now I'm trying to remember when they came. If it was August, we brought our last 2013 bond purchase to the board. It was a last round of computers out of the 2013 bond. And so that was our last purchase. This one might hang around for a little bit longer. We have a rather large project ongoing right now with the IT department for, I think, fiber throughout the district. And I'm not sure if that'll be wrapped up by June 30th. If it's wrapped up by June 30th, this fund will be closed up this year. But if not, we might have a little bit of lingering money in that account to spend. The next page is our newer sinking funds. The first one is the 2020 sinking fund. So this is our replacement sinking fund. We just had the first levy here in July. And we're anticipating bringing in about $7.3 million in that. And I've gone ahead and earmarked about $7.3 million worth of expenditures. And again, this fund is the primary funding source for the paving projects, boilers, and roofs that are going on throughout the school district. And this year, with the new sinking fund, we're also able to use it for instructional technology. And so that purchase of computers, we brought a bulk of it was covered by the 2013 bond, but what the 2013 bond couldn't cover, the sinking fund will. Next is our capital projects fund. And this is where we've historically put the proceeds from sale of property. So we started the school year with just under $1.7 million. We anticipate adding about $2.6 million, which will make available to us $4.2 million this year. I got ahead and I'm recommending to the board we approve about $1 million to be spent through June 30th. So this would be tentatively, we've had discussions about a central office renovation. And so by adopting this budget, this isn't, giving the blessing to move forward with that project. Obviously, we'll be bringing those specific purchases to the board for approval, but what this does again is sets aside some budget money should the board decide to go ahead with that project. So it looks a little deceiving because we see the ending fund balance is $3.2 million, but again, the actual available revenue is 4.2, and I'm just saying that we may spend about $1 million of that by June 30th. The next one is a quite boring one, but we're very happy because these are all tied to bonds at one time. These are our 3 existing debt retirement funds. The expenditures and revenue haven't changed, but the beginning fund balances have been updated. I did want to mention to the board, we will see a change on this for our next budget amendment. As you'll recall, we just did a refinance of our existing debt, which refinanced the 2014 refunding bond as well as the series 1 of the 2013 bond. And so again, we were able to save about $15 million worth of interest costs, something to be very excited about. And as a result, we will need to set up a new debt retirement fund. And one thing I'm working through with our auditors is an idea of potentially consolidating these accounts. We're already would be consolidating 2 of the accounts into one because, again, we did a refinance. But I am hearing from other districts that a lot of other districts maintain just one debt retirement fund, and within that debt retirement fund, break out each of their debt refunds. So just something to keep in mind, but not bringing that forward for you tonight. Next page is our food service fund, which I had shared with the board. Again, the addition you see on here is that other financing sources. This would be the transfer from the general fund if it needed to happen of about $400,000. You can see the federal reimbursements are expected to be roughly the same as what they were in 1920, but we see a decrease in the local sales. And again, that's where we would account for pupil sales that we've seen drop so far this school year. Our health and welfare fund, I've updated that. We've gotten updated numbers, went a little too far, as far as hard cap goes. So school districts in Michigan either follow 2 plans as far as health insurance costs for their employees. Either districts can pay 80% of the cost and the employees pick up 20%, or you can be a hard cap district. And if you're a hard cap district, the state comes out with the amount of the premium that the district can pay every year. For the last few years, that increase has been about 2%. And for the 2021 calendar year, the increase is 3.3%. So I've increased the premium amounts for that. And that's also had an impact then on the transfer from other funds. So that's been adjusted up. One thing I wanted to mention on here, which we discussed with the board last year, which we didn't move forward with it again because of the potential of a $650 per pupil cut and kind of wanting to see how that shook out. We did have a talk about what our target fund balance should be in the health and welfare fund. The reason that the district maintains a fund balance is because we are self-insured for a few things. We're self-insured, for instance, for workers' comp. So that means some companies pay just a percentage of payroll and we pay for actual claims. So there is a need to maintain some savings in the health fund to pay for any potential claims that come up. But the district does pay a small premium every year for excess coverage so that if we have any rather significant worker comp claim, an insurance company would kick in at a certain point and cover any costs above a certain limit. So last year we had discussed the idea of keeping $500,000 in the health and welfare fund. So that is something that I did want to remind the board of. And throughout the rest of the school year, maybe we can continue those conversations on do we want to, is 500, do we still feel comfortable with 500? And if that's the case, do we want to do maybe a transfer out of the health and welfare fund and maybe move that to our capital projects fund, for instance? So something just to keep in the back of our minds. And then the last two funds are pretty straightforward. The district maintains a scholarship fund. These aren't taxpayer dollars. These are donations received from various sources. And then the outgoing scholarships, we issue $1,000 scholarships to each, to a senior at each one of our high schools. So that's just pretty much an update of the fund balance on that. And then our school activity fund, which again is, we are just serving in a capacity of kind of watching over those funds. Those are funds raised by the schools or by various student activity clubs. So we kind of act as the fiduciary on those and hold those. All the check requests run through the business office so that we can validate that they're appropriate. But again, we're just holding these funds for these school activities. So that is our budget book. Again, pretty straightforward this year, or this amendment. You know, most of the significant changes that we went over, we covered back in October, but again, we just had a few changes that I wanted to go over with you tonight. So.
Does anybody have any other questions for Mrs. Smith? Okay, all right, we will see this amendment up for a vote then on the 12/14 meeting, correct?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right, and then if there's nothing else, that's going to complete the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. That will move us then to item 5, our Building and Site Committee. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this is in the capable hands of Mr. Centers.
Right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. The first item on our agenda this evening is future bond planning. Mr. Francis or Ms. Smith, are either of you going to get us started? Either or both?
I will just get us started by saying that Mr. Terrell from Plant Moran Cressa has joined us, and we're going to have a conversation that's going to be comprised of Allison Smith, Paul Terrio, Andrea Oquist, and myself. And we are going to run through, and I think Allison is the one that's going to share it, and we'll have that pinned for the audience at home as well. So we'll go through that portfolio. Good heavens, that PowerPoint, and we'll have our conversation and jump in, you know, because we don't see each other necessarily when we have the presentation going. Jump in if you have a question or need to pause us for a moment. And I think Allison's going to start us off.
I'm just going to say a few words before we get started. So as our board knows, we have had, I believe this is the third meeting where we'll be having some dialogue and discussion together with regard to our needs, our facility needs, based on our long-term facility plan, and really thinking about the future as it relates to what we want to be able to offer our students, our schools, and our school community. So we started at our study session last month and had extended discussion with regard to the needs that currently exist, as well as the opportunities before us as we look at bond debt and when that will be altered this coming spring. And then we also, at this past committee of the whole meeting on the 23rd, also had some opportunity to have dialogue with the board on what some of those potential projects may look like. So what we wanted to do this evening is, again, bring this back to you, remind the community of some background as it relates to funding sources for our district, and specifically with regard to our facilities. And then just dig a little deeper this evening into our current needs and our current considerations as it relates to the potential for a 2021 bond request. So I will ask Mrs. Smith to go ahead and get us started.
Mr. Francis, did you have something to say?
Just that, you know, if you click that thing that says raise hand, it apparently actually raises your hand and you're embarrassed. So that's all.
All right. Ms. Smith, are you ready? I think she's
My apologies. I didn't
No worries.
unmute myself before I started presenting.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay, again, I'm sorry. Can everybody just see the slides, or can you see the side stuff too? So I'll
We
make
see
it
the
bigger.
slide stuff as well.
I will make it bigger then. Then I can't see you, so please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions or comments.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. And again, I apologize. This isn't necessarily new slides. These first couple ones just kind of reiterated what we've shared in the past, but we really are excited just to start off by sharing about this opportunity we have for a no tax increase bond that will help us address some of the needs that we've identified in our 10-year facility plan. So just as a general reminder of how schools are funded, it goes back to Proposal A in 1994, and we receive a per pupil funding amount. And again, that foundation allowance was never calibrated to the actual cost of raising a child, and it was also it didn't include the need or funding to keep up school facilities. So that relies exclusively on local property taxes. So LPS does maintain a 10-year facility assessment. We update that annually. It identifies current and future needs. If approved by the voters, local school districts have two mechanisms for securing funds for facility needs. School districts can levy a sinking fund. We are very fortunate that our community did approve a 10-year sinking fund back in 2019. We knew at that time that that wasn't going to address all of our needs, but it was going to help us cover, again, a portion of the 10-year facility plan. The other option that school districts have is to sell bonds. And the nice perk of bonds, which I think I'll get to in a future slide, I will stop there and talk about sinking fund first. So sinking fund can be used for the continual upkeep of school buildings, facilities, and surrounding school sites like parking lots and playgrounds. It's used on a pay-as-you-go basis, and all monies collected are utilized to directly benefit the district. No bonds are sold, and there is no interest cost. And as I shared, our community just approved a sinking fund back in August 2019. Few of the things we've been able to do with that: paving projects, boilers and roofs, and also now instructional technology. The other mechanism to raise funds to help upkeep our facilities is bonds. Bonds are restricted funds. They can't be used for staff salaries, but then they can be used to purchase, erect, complete, remodel, improve, furnish, refurnish, equip, and re-equip school buildings. Unlike the sinking fund, there is an interest cost because we are borrowing money upfront and then paying it back over time. The school district the community last approved a bond back in 2013, and that too goes along to support our district's long-term facility plan. One thing that I wanted to share with the board and with our community is the idea that it may seem soon to some that Livonia would be going out for a bond again because we did one in 2013, but we're seeing that that's very normal when we look at our districts around us. We can see on this slide just a list of a few districts in our area that have gone for bonds at least around the time that we did, or maybe even after, that have already since gone for another bond. Another way to look at that is on this map, just so you can see again Livonia in the center, and we can see the districts around us that have either gone out for a bond the same year we did and have already gone out for another. But just to give you an idea, that's again the trend that we're seeing in funding. So this wouldn't be unusual for Livonia to go out for a bond in 2021.
And I'll just hop in for, go ahead, Phil.
No, you're probably going to say the same thing, so I'll let you go ahead.
So I think one thing, and if you want to just flip back, Mrs. Smith, to just the prior slide, it may be just a little easier to see. One of the reasons why we wanted to just spend a minute on this is because it would be a shift in the practice that we have normally had. And so one of the things that we've really looked at along with the Board of Education over the past few years is as we take a look at the 10-year long-term facility plan that again is regularly updated based on the needs that exist within our facilities, we have looked to stabilize funding sources so that we can really continue on a regular path of improvement year over year and be able to really look out about 3 years at a time, again, toward that 10-year plan and continue that rolling as we move forward. And so one of the things we did in 2019 was, again, look to stabilize that funding source from 5 years to 10 years. And so we are now in a 10-year cycle with regard to, for instance, the sinking fund and the operating millage. And that really allows us a certainty to be able to plan and move forward on a relatively regular schedule as we, chip away each year for the needs that exist within our facilities based on that long-term plan. And so as we continue to study this, along with our owner's rep from Plant Moran Cressa, Mr. Terriel and his team, and also taking a look at really the neighboring districts around us, one of the things that we have begun to see in other districts, and we believe would be advantageous for us as well, is to be able to take a look at the needs that exist, as well as the opportunity to take advantage of windows when an additional bond issue could be requested at no new taxes, no tax increase to voters. And what we've seen is districts that have been able to enter into that window, they are able to continue to regularly update their facilities and renovate their facilities and add some additional elements to their facilities, again, on a more routine and regular basis, which is the cycle on which we would like to get our district as well. What that does a couple of things. It allows us to maintain a stable rate of taxation. So we're not, instead of asking for increases or a large dollar amount, we're able to maintain that tax rate, but be able to have that larger funding source that can come from a bond as opposed to a sinking fund. And so you'll see a little bit further in our presentation why this is important and why we want Livonia to continue to lead. We want to continue to be a leader in the educational excellence that we offer, and we want to be able to continue to be a destination district for our students, for our families, and for our staff. And we know that what we are able to do with bond funds is to really enhance our materials, our facilities, and our offerings to students and staff. And so this is one of the pieces we wanted to share with you because it is a little differently than how we've looked at bonds in the past. And there isn't a right or a wrong. It's just this is an opportunity to take a look at stabilizing that rate and having that maintain consistency, but be able to continue that regular and very necessary work on a continual basis.
Mrs. Oquist, you said pretty much everything, but about 5 times better than I was going to. But one thing I just want to piggyback on would be to just sort of draw together this conversation with that 10-year facilities plan. We consistently update and look at our facilities and update that 10-year facilities plan. Doing a bond in this manner, where we consistently, as Mrs. Oquist had described it, where we have instead of spikes up and down, have that consistent funding source, means that we can continue to adhere to the needs of the facility plan as they come up, as opposed to putting them on. And one of the concerns from a facilities standpoint with regard to doing large projects in a relatively compressed time period is that all of the things that you do, especially in a larger district like we are with multiple facilities, items fail in the future all at the same time again. But when you can have a plan that spreads itself out, remain proactive both with your funding sources as well as then your repair replacements, you can spread that risk out over several years with regard to having to do large scale replacements all at one time. This is the more proactive plan is my point with this. When we did approximately 20 years ago, all the roofs in a few year period, that was great at that time, 20 to 23 years ago. The problem is now we've got to try to do all those roofs as fast as we can, and we can't do them all at one time. So we have to spread those out over multiple years, and that means, you know, some have to wait. So if we can do similar to that roof project where we spread them out over multiple years, the next generation of roof also can then be spread out over multiple years. That keeps us proactive. It keeps our bar, you know, much more smooth, and we don't have spikes in our need to do these large projects based upon our facilities plans. So I just wanted to add that piece to it.
Wonderful, thank you both. I just have two more pieces of information I want to share, and then I'll turn it over to Superintendent Oquist. The first piece was just sharing that we are seeing very strong support for bonds that are no tax increase across the state of Michigan. And we can see even going back, I mean, in recent history, that's the numbers in the far right column is without a millage increase. In November, 2 districts went out and we saw both of those passed. In August, 13 districts went out and it was a 92% passage rate. Before that, we're looking at 100%. So very strong support by the community for school bonds. The other piece I wanted to share with you is just a comparison. So you can see where Livonia Public Schools falls in comparison with other Wayne County school districts as far as debt retirement mills or sinking fund mills. You can see that Livonia Public Schools kind of falls in the middle to lower end of that. And that's where we're, again, with this no tax increase bond proposal, looking to stay in that same category. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Oquist that's going to share some next steps for us.
Ms. Oquist, can we take just a minute to pause to see if anyone has any questions? That was just a lot of info. Any questions, anyone?
I think Mr. Terrill had his hand up.
Mr. Terrill, would you like to add something?
Sorry, just fighting my internet connection over here. Just wanted to tag on to what Ms. Smith was saying about a couple slides ago about the support in southeastern Michigan for some of the recent bond issues, especially those that are keeping the millage rate flat and not increasing the millage rate. I think it really does show that even in these kind of tumultuous times, you know, the communities do realize how important strong public schools are, how important they are to the community, how important they are to keeping property values high, and really, you know, being one of the foundations and pillars of the community. So those 100%, 92% plus rates are what we've been seeing a lot lately. And then two, I think, as Ms. Oquist and Mr. Francis said as well, you know, we are seeing bond cycles a little bit closer together. You know, in recent memory, it is allowing people to be more proactive, districts to be more proactive and really have a better, more cohesive plan for how to address their facilities. It's no doubt that there's something missing in the state school funding mechanism for all the facility needs for districts that have 2 million, 3 million square feet of facilities. That's a lot of upkeep on an annual basis. And without that in place, it really, you know, really pushes districts towards wanting to go out for bonds, you know, in that 7 to 8 to 10 year cycle.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Terrill. Anyone else? All right, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Oquist then to proceed further.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, would you mind advancing?
I sure can.
Thank you. So I just want to take a few minutes and talk about where we've been these past couple of meetings. And so if we really take a look at our current needs assessment, I'd like us to think about it in really 3 separate sections. The first section really is focused on finishing what we started or completing previously identified projects we know that our prior administration and board team did extensive work beginning in 2011. I know that seems like forever ago, but as the district did a very extensive facility assessment to really begin this process and laid an exceptional foundation for the work that we still do today. And with that came the request for the 2013 bond. We know that during that process, there were some big items that we were not able to include in that particular bond issue. However, we did make significant strides in schools that were 40 to 60 years in age, again, covering over 3 million square feet. And we have done tremendous work with the bond issue from 2013. Some of the main areas that remained from that initial needs assessment were really three big areas. Redesigning and reimagining our library media centers. We did not, as you may recall, really enter in and touch our media centers at all with this last bond issue. One of the reasons for that is a prior bond, about 20 years prior to this one, really did focus on a major renovation to all of our media centers. And at that time, that was really one of the only areas of the schools that were updated. And so at this point in time now, we are really ready to look at redesigning and reimagining that space as we learn more about the collaborative nature of our learners and the opportunities that we believe we can embed in our library media centers. So that is one significant area that we would put under the bucket of really completing previously identified projects. The second is updating our school kitchens and our serving lines. This was an area that we did not really touch at all, with the exception of one or two schools where we made some updates to the serving lines as we made some changes within the cafeterias. So those are, for the most part, original to the schools. And we really have some very necessary work that we need to do in those kitchens and in the serving lines, as we've really changed some of the food service process that we utilize and what we do in those kitchens compared to what we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. The last one is enhancing our HVAC systems to impact both air quality as well as include air conditioning. I know that some of our community may find it surprising that we do not have air conditioning in our schools. And while we are not open for the majority of the summer, there are still many, many weeks in both the spring and as we end the school year, and then in the fall as we begin the school year. And oftentimes periodic days in between there as well, knowing our great state of Michigan. And it has really become a significant point of focus for us, for our students and our staff as we're working and learning in those environments. We've also learned a significant amount about the opportunities we have to increase air quality and purification. Although we have done that significantly with this past bond issue, we're learning more and more about what is possible and what we can do. So those are three areas that we would put in really the first section of previously identified significant needs that we would want to accomplish with the next bond. The second bucket would fall under maintaining and enhancing our investment. And we really do have, as I mentioned, a significant investment in our facilities, and not only each of our schools and each of our classrooms, but the grounds as well. And so there are some additional long-term facility plan needs that really come from, again, that detailed facility plan that we have for every facility within the district. Some of those facility improvements include additional electrical and plumbing restoration that we need to do. As you recall, when we did the bond, we identified some restrooms for renovation, but there were many that we did not, we were not able to update. And so we have some additional needs for restrooms, doors, and other areas of some of our schools where we were able to do only partial renovation with our most recent bond. And then again, we also have additional needs on each of our playgrounds. So we made a significant improvement and some great steps forward in that area, but we are really seeing the need for a second go round in that cycle at each of our K4 and 5-6 schools. So that would be one large area, are just some of those general facility improvements that we need to continue to build from the last bond. We have additional security enhancements that are needed, including additional cameras that we would like to include both internally and externally at our schools, as well as card readers to allow access at different points of our schools and facilities. We have some needs, believe it or not, we're already at the point where we need to go back into our field houses, which seemed new for quite a while, but at this point in time, we're looking at 20 plus up to 25 years. So we have some needs with regard to our high school field houses, our pools, and the annex area. And the annex area is that area as you enter onto the soccer, football field, etc. So that outbuilding, which we enter into the field area. And then again, continuing to focus on technology. We have certainly seen the increased utilization of technology by both our students and our staff. And we're learning a great deal about what is impactful and effective. And we have some exciting thoughts about how we can move forward in that area. So that's really that second bucket, maintaining and enhancing our investment. And then really, one of the things we're very excited about is the opportunity to innovate and explore opportunities to really continue our educational excellence in the district. So forward thinking and thinking about future projects. So while we certainly have the need to maintain and really enhance our current investment, we're also thinking forward and what else can we do to continue to offer exceptional learning experiences for our students. And so we've talked about, I know with the board, continuing to enhance our STEM and Project Lead the Way pathways, to have a home, a more permanent place for our robotics teams at both the middle school and the high school levels. We've talked about, again, the next phase and the next steps in meeting the needs as it relates to early childhood. So both at the preschool setting as well as our learners before they enter into our K-6 program, an opportunity to really take a look and be, again, a destination district for those early childhood experiences. We have some areas in career and technical education that we believe can enhance the offerings, the exceptional offerings that already exist at our Livonia Career Technical Center. There are some other high impact programs that we believe we've heard a significant amount of need in the area of manufacturing, as well as a desire for students to have some of those additional options available to them. And then one of the other things that we've talked about is enhancing collaboration stations or areas within the school for our students to collaborate with one another, with our staff, similar to some of those that we have added at the high schools, but to be able to replicate some of that at the other levels as well. So there is a lot of excitement with what is possible as we think forward. So that's really kind of a current needs assessment. And then I'd like to pair that with our current opportunities and our current considerations. And I believe the board would agree that you have been very focused on being exceptional fiscal stewards of our resources. The board has worn this mantle for many, many, many years. And it really has allowed us to weather some very difficult times in school funding, and also to make the very best use as we've seen that improve. And so we believe there's been very steady and consistent growth of our district fund balance, which has really allowed us to be very financially stable as a district. And the leadership of our board in that effort has really been exceptional, as also evidenced by the recent refunding of bond debt. So we've been able to save taxpayers the repayment of over $15 million of bond debt with the recent refinancing. And again, have received the highest rating on our district audits very positive bond ratings that have continued to increase. So we really think that that's a strong consideration for both our board and our community, that demonstrated fiscal stewardship is really an important element as we think about going back out to our community with this potential request. The second piece, we already spent a bit of time on reviewing bond issues in neighboring communities, and really that cycle and that pattern that we've seen shift over the past decade or so. We know that Livonia leads, and we believe that it's essential that we continue to grow and innovate, never stand on our laurels, but continue to think about what is possible for our learners. And we know that this is an element where we need to be focused on recruitment and retention of students. We know that in Michigan, overall, the number of students has declined significantly, and that based on birth rates, we see that likely continuing. So we think it is very important that we continue to be a destination district for not only families, but for staff as well. We've seen the number of candidates in teacher education programs drop by really significant numbers. So we know that while we continue to draw in many, many exceptional candidates, we know that as the years as we go forward, that will continue to be an element where staff will have many options available to them of districts, and we want to continue to be a destination district not only for students and families, but for our staff. And then really probably most importantly is there is a window of opportunity that we've shared with you that exists in May that we would lose beyond that point in time if we waited until August or November or the following year. So we have a window of opportunity where we would be able to request a bond issue in May of 2021 without any increase in tax rate. The tax rate would remain the same for all of our residents and our businesses, but we would also have the ability for a significant reinvestment in our community. And we know that reinvestment is a benefit to all. It's a benefit to those with students in school, as well as those who do not have students in school. Strong schools begets a strong community. And we believe that partnership has served us well for many, many years. So as we take a look at our needs and our considerations, we really bring to you a recommendation for next steps that would include, go ahead, Mrs. Smith, that would include establishing opportunities over the next several weeks to seek feedback and input from our students, our staff, our community, and our business and civic partners to say, are we on the right path? As you take a look at this picture we've just shared, do you agree that this is our path forward? And if so, are there other areas that we haven't considered, other areas of need that exist that we should be considering? Once we have that information and bring that back to the board, we'd like to make a determination on the bond term, meaning would we be looking at a bond term of 15 years, 20 years, 25 years? We've shared some of those projections with you and what that would generate with regard to revenue. We will revisit that with you, but that we'll need to make finalize that before we can draft bond language that would come before you for your consideration. So just thinking about as we move forward, we'd like to begin to establish those opportunities for feedback as soon as early as next week and begin that process and continue on through January, and then review at the study session, the committee of the whole, and then our regular board meeting in January, have 3 additional opportunities to have discussion and dialogue so we can make a determination prior to February 9th, which is the timeline for getting information as far as putting this on the ballot for May. So I will stop there and open it up to your feedback on where your thinking is at this point in time. We could probably come off the screen, Mrs. Smith, so that everyone can see one another. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Centers, so we can get some direction from the board.
Okay, great. Who would like to go first? Mrs. Burden.
Yes, I'm thrilled that we can address some of the needs of our district that we were not able to address in the first bond. The first bond, as we said, took care of a significant number of very large needs, but there were a number that were still out there at the time, and there are others that have risen to the top since then. So if we have an opportunity right now to go to our taxpayers and ask for approval of a bond that will mean no new taxes for our community, but continue to give us the ability to address some of these significant needs, that, as I see it, is just a win-win for our community members, our taxpayers, certainly for our students and our staff. This is an ideal time to come forward with this recommendation.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Jarvis.
Sneaky little bugger. Thank you. It didn't want to jump up there. So I was looking at the bond proposal, and one of the things that struck me is the 2013 bond proposal, which was, so overwhelmingly supported by our community, was a very, very important bond because it helped us bring our old buildings up to date. We had a lot of need just to replace things, add furniture, update the look, update the feel, increase technology, and so on, just to bring our old infrastructure up to date. When I look at the new proposal for the next bond, it takes us to the next level. Rather than having to update, it's about maintaining and moving forward into the future. There's a lot of things there about technology, STEM education, early learners, robotics, all kinds of future forward thinking programs. And that's the way that education is moving. So it is critical that we start, now that we're updated, we need to maintain and move forward. So that has me very excited.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I think now would be the time, especially to go out for a new bond. Looking at the no new tax structure, I think that's really important, especially for our community, to know that there will be no new money involved. I also agree with Liz that, it's kind of moving forward in the next direction. And I think this is good timing, and I think we're on the right track.
Great. Anyone else? Mrs. Frank.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm having some internet connections, which is why I'm moving all over my house. If you're all seeing all these different backgrounds, I'm having internet issues. So I agree that this is that these are necessary items for our district. I think I have been in the schools whenever it is those 90-degree days, and we want our kids, when we go back in person, we want our kids to be able to learn effectively and our teachers to be able to teach effectively. And when they're going out for recess and coming back in on those days, the heat is just radiating in the classroom. And there is not a lot. We have to create environments that are conducive to learning. And I just think this type of air conditioning, these type of things to keep up our buildings, it does just sound like roofing and that sort of thing. But in order to keep an environment that is conducive for these kids to learn, our students to learn, and our staff to be able to teach effectively, we need to prepare them and to give them the environment that they can do so. So I think it's really important that we keep up our facilities and we keep up the environment so that we can continue to strive to the next level and continue to reach higher and higher with our kids.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, I would have, oh, Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. I think one of the most important aspects of all of this is one of the points on the PowerPoint presentation is we as a board do not take these decisions lightly. We don't jump into things. We do our homework. And over the years that I've been on the board, and even before that, we were extremely fiscally responsible in the money that we have. We are so grateful to the support that our community gives us, and we use those resources in the best and most economical way possible. And I agree that what we've done in the past we had a wish list. If you all remember, for those who were on the board in 2012 and 2013, and even going back to 11, of almost $300 million. And we just weren't able to include all of that at that time. So it's evidence of the fact that we weren't able to do all of the things that we wanted to do. And there are things that are left unfinished at this point. So we, as we say, we want to finish those up, finish what we started, but then jump into the future and provide the best facilities and the best education that we can for our students. So I think this is, and when you look at the other communities, we're really falling in line with the timing on prior bond issues and follow-up bond issues. So I think this is an opportune time, especially when we're able to do this with no new money to our community that has been so generous to us in the past. So this, I think this is a perfect time. Thank you, Mr. Centers.
Thanks. Mrs. Bonnefield.
I think also in the last year, we have gone through such a huge learning process with the pandemic that's really changed sort of the way we do things and the way we could do things. It's forced us to think outside of the box. And absolutely, I'm excited to get everybody back in the building, but it has given us a little bit of a different perspective on what we can do with technology and where we're going and what the future holds. So along with, kind of finishing the 2013s and hopefully providing some extra, I'm all about the Career and Technical Center, of course. I'll give it one more plug. I think that that we've learned a lot over the last year, and as we hopefully come out of this pandemic, we'll be able to use that knowledge to our advantage. The pandemic has put a lot of strain on us, but has also forced us to really step back and think about, different things we can do and how we can do those and how we can make things happen. So, if you try and look at some of the good things that have come out of that, and I think, the bond will hopefully help us to sort of mold what we do and allow us to make some of those updates and changes.
Great, thank you. Any last words?
I see a little hand up for Mr. Terrell. I don't know.
I think that's yeah. You said that since the last time. Thank you for everyone's comments. I agree with all of my colleagues wholeheartedly. Our community has a lot of pride in our buildings, and while they're not the newest buildings, they've been well maintained. They are geared toward, the renovations have geared toward our programs and making sure that they have utility for what we want to do with our students. So we want to keep that going. We want to keep Livonia on the cutting edge and really making those buildings responsive to the needs of the community and to the students. So I'm very excited to go forward with this. I know everyone else is too. The fact that we can go to our community, keep our buildings up without asking for new money, I think is really huge. So I'll be excited to keep going through this process, and I think everyone else will too. So Mrs. Oquist, does that give you the direction you're desiring tonight?
It does. Thank you so much for that guidance. And now what we'll do is we'll continue to grow that sphere of feedback by going to each of our groups and starting that opportunity. And again, some of that will take place over the next several weeks, but really that doesn't end even if and when the board votes to put this on the ballot. That process would continue. As you know, we had, I believe, what was it, Mr. Terrell, 15 or 16 different bond committees that we formed after the 2013 bond. We had significant involvement at a district level, and then each school had a school-based bond team. And so, this is a little different with this bond issue in that we really have a pretty good idea of where our needs are and where they exist. So certainly we want some feedback on narrowing some of these pieces down, but we're not really starting with a blank slate. That long-term facility plan is our guidebook. In addition to that, we know what we still had remaining from our prior need list. And so this will be a little different in that we're really not starting with a blank slate of saying, what do we need in the district? We really know what some of those needs are that exist. And so we're a little further ahead at this point. We would really be looking for feedback on, the timing of this and really some of the refinement of those areas, especially as we think about the future forward projects. But we really wouldn't be starting from scratch. We would really be saying very similarly to what we've done these past couple of meetings. Here are the big needs. And then from there, here are some of the additional dollars and where might we put them and how might we utilize those and how can we best serve our school community. So that's where we would go next. And again, some of that may take place up through January, but that will continue on up through the opportunity for our voters to weigh in on that potentially in May. And then again, as we begin implementation following that. So throughout the process, there will be opportunities for folks to put their imprint on this process.
Thank you. All right, well, that ends item A. Mr. Terrio, is this where you get off or you're staying with us for item B?
I don't have the agenda in front of me, I'm sorry.
It's
So
CTE computer lab replacement.
He's not, no,
I'll
he's
bid you
not
guys
applying
good.
to this one.
All right.
Well, let me attend.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
Paul.
Take care.
All right,
Thanks.
Mr. Francis.
I have one item, as you can see, and it is titled the CTE, which is the Career Technical Education Classroom Computer Labs Replacement. It's plural. So we've got in your packet, I think we ended up with 7 quotes is where we were at. All of them are from CDWG, and this is all going to be in totality. We'll do one big resolution to put with the board, as well as one purchase order. But the reason for the differentiation, there's a couple reasons. One, we're looking at 2 different budget codes. So Career Technical Education is not only the Career Center, it's also any CTE program in one of our high schools. Okay, and those programs, based upon certain criteria from the state of Michigan, get funded through what's called added cost dollars. And it's a specific line item from the state of Michigan when they fund these programs. So that's some expenditures that are unique and specific to CTE programs. And again, we're talking about not only the programs and classes that are at the Career Technical Center, the LCTC, but also programs like marketing and business classes, et cetera, at the 3 high schools. And they're all eligible for that funding, and then obviously in turn eligible to expend those funds on their programs when they have needs. Now there's a second funding source, which is a federal grant called Perkins, and I'm sure all of you in the past have, we've come to the board and sought approval for Perkins funded items for CTE. So we split some of these based upon the funding source, so it would be cleaner to see and cleaner to be able to refer to with regard to the specific quote from CDWG. And then the other reason that they're split is because they're going into a few different classrooms, and that makes it a little bit easier as well. So we've got a classroom at the Career Center, which is the web design and graphic imaging web design, as well as the graphic design and imaging courses. Those two classrooms have a couple of quotes in here, and we're replacing in the website class the computers and also the furniture. And by furniture we mean the student and computer furniture. We're not talking about just getting lounge chairs and things. We're talking about directly related to swapping out the items in the lab. In addition, we have the graphic design course at the Career Center that are getting laptops. Right now, they use and have been using an Apple product for the graphic design work. They're sort of in this in-between stage right now. They're working closely with our IT department. The teacher is working with the IT department, and they're going to transition from the Mac lab that they're using into these laptops. So this is a purchase using, again, the funds, the added cost funds for the graphic design class. Now jump over to Franklin High School. Their marketing class is also very similarly going to get an update to both the machines as well as the furniture for, like, so the tables for those computers. So that's why you have multiple on here, and it's, again, different spaces as well as different budget codes. And in totality, we have oh goodness, I don't know if I had them added up in my memo, which I don't have in front of me, but it was $800 and something thousand, and I apologize that I don't have my memo printed in front of me, but you have that in your packet. I'm really sorry. I thought I had jotted that number down. Are there any questions?
Mr. Francis, I show the number in your memo at 188,930.59.
Did I say 800,000?
Yes.
That's a bit more. Thank you. I'm sorry. So thank you. Just under 190. Thank you. Are there questions? I know looking through all of the quotes can be incredibly confusing. It'd be nice if it was just one big quote, but having them split up, there are some notes on the quote reference section at the top that gives a little bit of a descriptor for them. But are there questions in general about these? And I will, as a quick caveat, Gary Harper is the principal of the Livonia Career Technical Center. He is the one that works with the 3 high schools CT programs as well. So Gary, as well as the finance department, as well as our IT department, all 3 of them have worked together to ensure that we have appropriate budgets, approved Perkin grants for the items that are being placed on here, as well as the right machines for the right purposes, because the teachers have been involved as well. And I guess I'd say one last piece is we're buying this now because you should be buying things and using things based upon the budgets that the state and the federal grants come to you. And that's a very common mantra is, let's not buy this in May and June. Let's buy this now so we can get them in the district set up and working so students can be using them.
That's great. Does anyone, Mrs. Bradford?
Yeah, yes, I think these are wonderful items. When do we anticipate that they would be able to be utilized? I mean, are some of these as soon as in the spring, or when the kids are back in person in springtime, or do we know?
It's gonna take some time because there's a few different stages. As with any of these computer purchases, especially large labs that have to be set up, there's generally about, and it's just a ballpark, but about an 8-week period. Because when we order items, we order them to the specifications of what the needs are, as opposed to, you and I run over to Best Buy or something and grab whatever's on the shelf. These are being built for our needs. So that takes time. So that's obviously multiple weeks. 8's a ballpark with that, generally speaking, but obviously supply chains and whatnot that occurs. And then once we receive them, they still need to be imaged. They need to be set up and configured. So all of that would say that by spring, we would hope that they would be ready to go for the students, because that gives plenty of lead time with regard to build, ship, receive, configure, and set up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think they're wonderful. And using the Perkins grant, I think, is a great opportunity for us to purchase some of these items and get them into the hands of the kids. I'm all about that. So that's great. Thank you.
Anyone else with question or comment? All right. Well, it's good to see, especially this CTE program, sometimes these computers have some more stringent requirements than, our other courses, where we're maybe doing a lot of word processing or things like that, web surfing. So it's good to see that we're staying on top of this, getting fresh devices in there for students. It's great to see. So
yeah, and as you study and look a little closer at the quotes, you'll see. I really was saying computers and the furniture, but of course there are accessories, there are carts, there are surge protectors, there are the software licenses. All of that is bundled in here per the configuration from our IT department. So that's all within these quotes.
Great. Mr. Francis, that'll be at our regular meeting.
Please.
Thank you. All right, seeing nothing else, Mr. Johnson, that concludes building and site this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. That takes us then to item 6, our policy committee, Mrs. Burton.
We don't have anything for policy this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Takes us to item 7, personnel committee, Mrs. Frank.
Nothing for personnel.
Thank you. That takes us to item 8, our legislative committee, Mrs. Bradford.
I believe we do not have anything tonight. There's no updates or anything. We are staying the course and letting the legislators do their thing, whatever that may be.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. I see Mrs. Burton.
I did want to add one thing, and I'm not sure where it would best fit in, and legislative is as good as any other place. We recently received an email from MASB looking for nominations of folks from our region to be on the board of directors for MASB. Dan Centers has expressed interest in this, and I am happy to nominate him to represent not only Livonia Public Schools, but our whole region of the state of Michigan. So I'm happy that he's interested in this. It looks like it's a 1-year filling a vacancy, but I'd like to see that put on our agenda for next week if that's got approval of the rest of the board to put that up for a vote, because it does require a board vote.
I'm all for it. Thank you, Mr. Sanders, for stepping up.
Thank you all for your support.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, if we can put that on the agenda, that would be great. Okay. Looks like we don't have anything else this evening. So I want to thank my board colleagues, my cabinet buddies, and anyone who tuned in tonight to watch. Thank you. Hopefully you saw some things that you didn't know before and have a little greater understanding of how the school district works. So I guess I'll say good evening and thank you, and we'll see you all Monday night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.